discuss the confidential information that's in Appendix 3, then we will go into private session. Otherwise, we'll be considering that meeting in public. Can I ask, please, if any member has a declaration of interest in any item that appears on this evening's agenda? No, in which case we'll turn to minutes of a previous meeting, which was the 7th of December 2021. Anybody have any amendments, corrections or comments they'd like to pass on those minutes? No, all clear, in which case, thank you, Phil. Just ask you to confirm your agreement. They agreed? Thank you very much indeed. To sign the minutes. I have no specific chair's announcements and not aware of any urgent business. So we'll hand over to Malcolm for the first of a number of reports. Malcolm, this first one is with you, is the period 7 revenue monitoring report. Over to you.
Fine, thank you, Chair. I'm working on the assumption that most people will have read this, and as you'll see from that, we're currently demonstrating just under 2.5 million overspend at the year end. However, what you won't know is that period 8's coming through now. We're beginning to get the first views of that, and that looks as if that's pulling it back. So we're near a 1.8 overspend, so that's going in the right direction. You always have to bear in mind as well that there's a £5 million contingency put in for this year, frankly, because of 4 councils coming together, and it was put in for things we just didn't know what to expect, and so far so good. So we looked at the moment that would be okay at the year and end of the year. So far so good, and we're looking to pull back that 1.8 hopefully as quickly as we can, ideally by the end of the calendar year, but it might go beyond that. And then we would expect to see improvements during the last quarter when we start to see where contingencies are not needed and pull them out. So that's the current view, and the watchword is, as I always use on this, is so far so good. That's really, you can pick that up on page 15 if you so desire. The HRA budget is showing a balanced budget, so I'm not intending to dwell on that. The only things I would draw your attention to out of interest, because each department has a comment on that, and the COVID funding, which is on page 26, shows that we're still in good order there. So so far so good on that one. We just don't know what to expect, of course, and anybody knows what to expect, then please tell me. But it looks as if we're right there. Now, the other interesting item is on savings proposals. It looks as if we'll get something just a bit north of 10 out of the 13 on that. And that's quite normal, really, and you don't always get 100% of these things, but we'll be striving to get what we can there. But nonetheless, we're looking at the year end as a balanced situation at the moment. Unless something comes careering down the track we're not aware of, I'm not expecting that to change significantly between now and then. Thanks, Chair. That's about the size of it.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Now on this item, as on most items, we have a number of speakers. We have 6 speakers registered in the following order. First of all, we'll hear from Councillor Roberts, Councillor Alva, Harvey, Councillor Randall, Councillor Stone, Councillor Beardsworth, and Councillor Harris. So Councillor Roberts, over to you. Emma, welcome.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everybody. It's really great to see the detail that's contained in the report, and I actually think it would be helpful to receive detail like this more regularly at Cabinet rather than the quarterly reporting chosen. Looking through the detail, though, true zero-based budgeting will usually concern itself with why each expenditure is being made and what can be achieved with it. And I'm not sure we're really looking at zero-based budgeting, although the report suggests that we are. My worry is that we don't really have an understanding of what's actually needed to run the services and provide an excellent provision. And we're almost just ticking along in a way that we were before. And even doing that, we've still got a significant deficit. So I really appreciate all the hard work that's gone in. And I also appreciate the briefings that have been given by officers to assist in an understanding. But do we really understand what the actual cost of running this authority is, because I can't see that from the reports. Thank you.
Thank you. Shall we, Malcolm, do you want to respond, or shall we take further speakers?
Happy to. It's not a deficit, Emma. We're actually positive. We've put the money in just for this occasion, the 5 million, so that because things turn up, we didn't know what to expect. Anything could turn up, still can, of course. So you've got to be aware of that. But if you take that prudent approach, that I'm bound to look to Martin and Rebecca there for the benefit of that, and quite the right thing to do, and it's proving to be okay at the moment. But nonetheless, we still need to pull back that 1.8. But then that would give us a small surplus at the end of the year, which is what we're looking to do. Not a deficit.
Not sure that answered my question, Chair. But do we really know what it costs to provide the service provision set out in our corporate plan and the service provision
I've answered the
residents
question,
need?
Emma. I'm not going any further on that, not tonight.
Okay, thank you. Don't see Councillor Alva Harvey. Councillor Randall, therefore, is our next speaker. Wendy, welcome.
Thank you, Chair, for allowing me to speak. On page 16, table 2, it says special expenses. I think of 4,854,000, if I've got those zeros correct. Huge amount of money, which I can't find an explanation for. So I'd be really interested to know what those special expenses cover. And then further down under the education, delays in receiving statutory advice from education psychology team due to staff vacancies, meaning an underspend of 294,000. I find that extremely worrying. I know across the professional field there is a national shortage, but if we're not even receiving statutory advice, I don't know how we're going to get the advice at the right time. And then I've got major concerns over staffing itself. There seems to be huge amount of staff vacancies. There is nowhere near enough staff in the contact centre. So people are being pulled across from their own departments to answer the phones, which is causing a backlog in their own departments. I've known staff breaking down, crying, and this is not how things should be. There's been a whole restructure of staffing. Some of them gone through some terrible weeks of worrying about their jobs. And obviously all this understaffing, I don't know how much that's affecting the budget, because the budget looks good, but you take into account all of those vacancies, and surely that would take you way over budget. So I'd like to know actually how many staff vacancies there are, and if you put that into monetary terms, how much that would amount to. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Wendy. Shall we respond to those points? Malcolm, was there anything I might bring Fiona?
Yeah, sure.
Possibly Anna might want to comment.
Evening, Wendy. And yeah, the HRA one is, sorry, the special expenditure, that's an HRA one. So that doesn't come under our direct control at the moment. I don't know the specific details here tonight, but we've taken on board to let you know what that is. And the thing to do on a thing like that, I've said it before, when you have a query like that, absolutely no problem at all, because it actually alerts us to things as well as anything, just email me or Martin, any one of us will get back to you straight away. And so that's the best way, because to answer them on the night is very, very difficult to do, as you appreciate. On the other items you bring up, a lot of those aren't really within the financial remit. What we can do is tell you what the score is, if you like, of activities. But if you take things on the psychological assessment team, I can't comment on it. I can tell you what the financial implications of doing this or doing that are, and what the score is at the moment. I mean, that question is best addressed through to the head of the department of that team, because I can't answer it. I can answer the financial, but not the detail.
I'll just, however, it's quite something to say about staff breaking down and crying and so on. I'd like Anna, the Chief Executive, to comment on that if she may. She may or may not want to comment on the Educational Psychology Service, but I'm hoping that that's something, Wendy, that you therefore took action on. But let's hand over to Anna to perhaps comment on any point she thinks is relevant.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, the educational psychology team, we have had vacancies for a long time, and one of the issues there has been recognising some of the national pay terms for educational psychologists, and we have just put an offer into the unions to do that, which should make it easier to recruit to the team and also stop us using agency staff, which is always our preference not to, so that we can employ people. But we're doing a huge amount of work with that team at the moment to improve the processes to make sure we can meet all the statutory requests. It used to also have an income target, which didn't help in that team to sell on traded services, and the future budget for next year writes that out too, so that that pressure goes away. So we are tackling that, and we are doing some major things in terms of offers to them to retain those staff. In terms of overall vacancies, we're running at about 200 on an organisation of 2,800. So yes, there are vacancies, but I think it's a national issue. It's a national issue about retaining staff and recruiting staff everywhere. But we are not in a situation at the moment where any of the services particularly are flagging, other than the obvious COVID effects at the moment, serious concern. And I certainly haven't heard of anybody talking about staff being diverted from services into the contact centre. We have just this week had some real challenges on the demand on the household activity and support fund, where we have had to put some people in to make sure we could cover all the calls for help we've had, but not more widely than that at all. And I think, just to pick up your restructuring point, because I spent a lot of time talking to staff about this, we've restructured 3 services, which is revenues and benefits, bringing them together, the executive assistants and the tier 1, and that's it. We haven't restructured any other teams. We are going through a process of looking at that and how we harmonise pay and everything else, but we're doing that absolutely in consultation with staff. So it's only 3 areas of the whole council, but if there are people in tiers, then absolutely I want to hear about it from those people, from you, from anyone, because that is obviously not how we should run services, and I wouldn't want it to be the case.
Have you
Can I just
reported those situations at all, Wendy? If you've witnessed people in that sort of anxiety, have you acted to do anything to support?
I have spoken to them, but I've just said, can you go to your manager or HR, to let them know how you're feeling, and they're saying it's pretty much across the board. And I have spoken to Martin Henry, because I did hear about this a little while ago, and I did ask him if I would be able to come in and speak to some staff, and he said obviously I could, but it is quite difficult because there is a lot of home working. But you might, a lot of people would understand that I'm a real people person, and this have the last thing that I would hate to see is for people get to the point that they would walk away. I mean, I know that, staffing is difficult. I know that you've got agency staff that you'll be working in, and even, trying to recruit agency staff is not easy. And obviously those pressures are being served across the board. And I was at the planning committee meeting on Thursday, and even there, they were talking about how everybody's working on different systems, how within one council it's working really well, how another council is months and months behind, but they can't share that work because the systems aren't compatible. So, obviously, if you've got a small team that are just being absolutely bogged down with their work, when other teams can't help them, you can see that this is, it's going to have a knock-on effect, of those staffing issues.
Okay.
Okay, but just going back to Malcolm's bit, Malcolm, you do have to remember that we are opposition. So we are always going to challenge you in the public arena when we can. And you've got to remember that the public read these papers. So if I've got to ask you as a councillor and I don't understand, the public are not going to know what those headings mean.
I think one of the things about the budget is it covers all areas. We need to draw that to a close. We've got a number of speakers on this item. Can I just make a plea to any councillor? I think we have systems to sort out. We know that. We took on a new council. We're bringing four legacy councils together. There are huge system problems. If that ever goes anywhere near anybody feeling the kind of stress that's been aware of here, and I talk to a lot of staff every day, and I've not experienced anything like that. People are working incredibly hard in challenging situations. You cannot just listen and ignore that. That needs to be flagged up to the chief executive. And I'm going to ask the corporate director, Sarah, perhaps to just, maybe we put something in the newsletter to members to tell them how they can confidentially, we need at least, Wendy, to be given a clue about where you're experiencing these things, because we're not. Okay. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.
Let's move on to our next speaker. Rebecca's going to quickly comment because that was planning related.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor Randall mentioned the planning committee on Thursday, which was the planning and policy committee, where we did introduce to councillors our planning improvement, and as part of that presentation, we recognise that there is an issue, but that was part of an improvement plan which you saw. So I think to represent it in a slightly different way is a bit disingenuous. It was a planning improvement, part of a package. We recognise the stresses, and we are working on turning it around, and staff recognise that and are welcoming our plans. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we now have four more speakers on this, and Councillor Harvey has now joined us, who is registered next to speak. Welcome. Please come forward and join us. If you've not used it before, it's the middle button on the microphone there as well. Welcome.
Hi, everybody. Thank you. I'm going to talk about item 6 about the revenue, and I've got some, say again? I want to raise an issue about the outsourced services and income generation. And that comes to, I'll give you 2 examples, is the car parking tickets and Kingdom. This services makes money for the service providers. Why are we outsourcing to provide private companies to do the service? Keep in mind that every penny counts as a revenue.
Happy to answer on Kingdom. The thought on doing that was that we should not be profiting from that when the contract was taken on as the Borough Council, but rather we should use excess funds, or if you like, surplus funds, to direct them into those areas that weren't cost effective. The town centre generates enough ticket revenue to cover the cost of the operation, but when they go to Rectory Farm or East Hunsbury or other areas, it doesn't. So it was felt ideologically it should not be a profit-making service for the council, but that money would be reinvested into other areas. Thank you very much. I think our next speaker is Councillor Stone.
Thank you, and apologies for being late, and I'm sorry I missed your
Little traffic.
presentation. We've been running a winter activity fund today for refugee youth, and we're both very, very tired, I have to say. I read this report with great interest, as ever. I always read it as if it's a novel, Councillor Longley, and I look to see what the story is within the report. So I've got a couple of things to say. I think it's a very well written report, so thank you very much. And I appreciate the way it's been structured and all the information that's made available in the report. I think it's a really good example of team working, I think, and really well done. But there was always going to be a but. I think the narrative within it shows us there's a lot of fragility within our organisation. I think a lot of that fragility is echoed nationally. We're being told all the time that there are huge budget gaps across the country for children, for adult social care, for highways, and a whole number of things. And people are saying, you know, we really need to be not just talking to the government, but, you know, making very strong representation to the government for a fairer way of doing things. And I think that's right. So the fragility that I'm observing within the story of your report, if you like, is exactly around what Councillor Randall was saying, which is, you know, in addition to the national issues around staffing, we have our added issues, it seems to me. And I haven't seen anywhere what the plan is to offer people the opportunity to come and work for us, which is really, really compelling. So I'm worried about that. But the other fragility is in our transformation journey, isn't it? You know, where things are not quite coming together. It's not quite happening. It isn't really quite working. And all of that is putting a huge amount of stress and strain on services and on staffing. And I keep saying this, one of my observations about the failings within children's wasn't the failings of frontline staff. It was the failings of the infrastructure that should have been supporting them. And what hurts me is that we are still witnessing that failure. It isn't helpful. And I think it should be a priority for us to do something about. So well done on the report. But, you know, I do think we have got huge, enormous issues going forward. And the other thing I just quickly wanted to say was, there's reference here to zero-based budgeting. This is not my understanding of what zero-based budgeting is. What I'm looking forward to is the experts, that's the directors and the ADs, telling us what excellent service looks like, how much excellent service costs, and then compared to our budget, what that budget gap is, so that we know exactly what we're dealing with. Thank you.
Thank you. Malcolm, do you want to comment?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, thanks for the comments on the report, Danielle. Very much appreciated. Martin really deserves most of the credit there, I got to tell you that. The fragility, yeah, it's always fragile. You'll never hear me say I'm confident. If you hear me say that, give me a whip round the ear, because I always say every time pretty much, so far so good, because I'm very, very much conscious that there could be something going to track that we're not aware of. And so you'll rarely get me to be exuding confidence. I'll always be cautious on these things. So it always will be fragile. Your comments on transformation, yeah, I agree with you there. So much so that you actually brought a point out there worthy of note, in that it'll be early in the new year now, we're changing the approach we take to that, because it's not clear enough, and it should be crystal clear to all of us where we're going on that and the whys and wherefore. So you'll see a slight modification of how we go about that in the new year. So I think that it needs freshening. That's okay. Now, zero-based budgeting. How long you got? We meet up month to month, so you obviously well know. We'll have a little chat about it then, because I've got some other thoughts on that, but not for tonight. I don't think we'll be here tonight too much. Thanks for your comments.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Malcolm. Two speakers left. Next one registered is Councillor Beardsworth. Sally, welcome.
Thank you, Chair. Can I say this is quite interesting bedtime reading, although my husband was quite concerned when I went to bed with a magnifying glass because of seeing how small everything was. So he thought I was losing my sight. I said, no, don't worry, it's just because it's very, very small at the moment. So if in future we could have them a little bit bigger, it would make it, of your aging population, somewhat easier to read. Couple of questions. Malcolm, a very interesting report, very well and easy to comprehend, which is good for me. It says in 2.4, it said what emerging issues have been identified as part of the exercise that will be highlighted in future reports. Now, you've had the latest report, I understand, and have you found any identifiable issues in that? That's the first question. In 2.8, you ask that there will be mitigations in the future. Have you made any mitigations already? And if you have, what are they? And what plans have you got to address this problem? Page 27, you've got its proposed savings, but it's all in the red. So it's 3.117 million in the red, which is very, very difficult to understand how you're going to recoup that. Those are the main questions I wanted to ask. I do have, are we covering the budget at the same time as in the speaking Chair? Is that part of it, or
We've got the further item, is it item 9? So
I
for
can
the
I can
draft
save that
budget.
for later?
And I can confirm, yeah, you're registered to speak on that, Sally.
Okay.
So, yeah,
The
come
the
back.
other thing is, I will echo that the staffing issues are one of morale, I think is difficult, and it probably is difficult for staff to talk to the administration because it would seem disloyal. But they do sometimes talk to us, and because they've have known me a long time. And I think there are concerns and there are worries about, you know, the future of the council and their part in it. So I think as soon as we can sort of lay some of these fears to rest, it will be better for everybody. Do you want to answer the questions now, or is that all right?
Well, any issues, is the first question. Yeah, there's always issues. I mean, it'd be a strange day when there wasn't one, frankly. And the best way to answer that probably is if you look at the individual reports, they're all highlighted there. There's things come and things go. You know, the issues aren't always bad. Usually about 3 out of 4 are, but not always. And so if you look at the individual reports, that's probably the best way of
You've got the second report coming through, the next quarter's report. I just wondered if anything was highlighted in that.
period 8, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's an ongoing thing. You know, there's every month there's something coming up,
Okay.
and every day almost. I think not some bigger than others, obviously. So if you look at the individual report, that's the best way of judging what's going on, because they're at the cold face, as it were.
Okay.
Now, regarding mitigations, what we are expecting to do now, what I would expect to see in the last quarter, and this is fairly normal, it certainly has been ever since I've been involved, is that you start getting provisions coming out that, I mean, staff naturally say, well, if they think they're going to spend 100, they put 101 in or 102, you know, I'll do the same. We all do it. And to make sure that they're right. And as the year gets towards the end, it tends to say, well, no, I don't need 102, I need 101 or something like that. And they come out. And it all comes finally home to roost, of course, at the year end. But during the last quarter, I would, given that scene we've got there now, I'd be very, very surprised if that 1.8 didn't become a number that was eliminated. And in fact, we ended up with a surplus. I'd be absolutely amazed.
Okay.
So there's not, actually, I don't think any need to do anything other than see where we're going and just making sure that the provisions are dealt with appropriately. And we just keep a tight cost control, which we've got to do all year anyway. So nothing to get too uptight about there, I don't think.
Okay.
I mean, if that doesn't happen, then that's another matter. I'd be amazed if it doesn't.
So the proposed,
Yeah.
So thank you, Chair. Can I just pick up a couple of points made already? So the first one being about zero-based budgeting.
yes.
I think we're talking about different approaches here. So we had a number of services that came across to us on day one, and the zero-based budgeting process we've taken so far is, instead of saying, let's have a look at the budget that we've got, we've said, let's cost up those services that have come across, and let's compare with on a blank piece of paper, and they compare that back to the budgets that came across to provide that comparison. I think what's being referred to earlier is a slightly different approach, where you're saying, relook at how you deliver all of your services, build that up from scratch, and then see how much that costs. I think we're talking about two slightly different approaches there,
Okay.
which I acknowledge, but I don't think it's fair to say, actually, that's not a zero-based budgeting process that you've done. It is. It's a different approach to the one that you've talked about previously. I think we can demonstrate there have been issues coming out of that, because we see some of that pressure coming into the forecast position for this year on things like Treasury management, on things like MRP, which is covered in the report. We see some of those issues being addressed as part of the budget setting for next year. So where we've got budgets that have come across, where as part of the zero-based budget exercise, we've identified the assumptions aren't quite right or erroneous, or there's income budgets that have come across which we need to correct. All of that features not just in this report, but it features in the draft budget report for next year. So we're tidying all of that up. It's an ongoing process, so we'll continue to have issues coming out of the woodwork which we need to address. That's normal budgeting. So every year when we do a budgeting process, we always have base budget corrections, because we identify something in the base budget where we say that's not quite right, or the assumption wasn't quite right, we need to correct that. So I think in that respect, we're covering those issues that are coming out, which you've highlighted in paragraph 2.4.
Mm,
I think if I just come on to the red items that are highlighted later on,
yeah,
the 3.117, 3.1 million pounds worth of pressures. This is the savings that we think won't at this point in time be delivered in this financial year, and therefore we've built them into the forecast outturn position.
Okay.
So they're already built into this overall position that you're looking at tonight. It's not another 3.1 million pounds worth of pressure, which will be on top of what's being highlighted here. So that's a really important point, because we're acknowledging there is a risk to some of those savings proposals, and we need to build that into our latest forecast outturn position, which is what we've done.
okay, so it's a take into account. Thank you very much, Martin, for that explanation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Final speaker on this item 6 is Councillor Harris. Jonathan, welcome.
Thank you, Chair. Most of my points have been covered, actually, which you'll be pleased to know. A couple of things I do want to just pick up on, though, if I may. The first of which is really just to build on the point that Councillor Randall made. I myself also read the report with particular concern about the educational psychology issue. It seems a rather large gap. I hear the comments that's been made by the Chief Executive, but I just really want to flag my own observation on that point, that it does seem to be a particular issue that we need energy and focus on. That leads to the comment about staffing issues generally also. I appreciate that we are in a tough market and we are competing, and it's a national issue, but our focus clearly has to be on our council and services in our area. And my concern is with the number of vacancies that we're carrying, when exactly will we have a tipping point when things do start to impact on our services, because 200 vacancies does sound like quite a large number. And I would imagine it won't take much more of that before it creates pressure on services. And I finally just want to make my note of appreciation for the monthly briefings that we have. But I would ask, if we can, moving forward, is it possible as we move into the final part of the year, maybe to have slightly more detail? I know we're obviously doing this at a quarterly at the moment, even if it's top line headline figures, given that we've identified that there are potentially some pressures, would it be feasible to actually have more detail for the remainder of the year? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. Well, the one that I'm going to address is the monthly meetings. That's the other ones I think being well covered. And both yourself and Danielle have been coming to these, for those that don't know, on a very regular basis, and can open to ask any questions they want to, with Martin's there and I'm there. And I'm very pleased to give you more detail on that, Jonathan. And reason is, I'm very pleased for both yourself and Danielle, is that you never quite know when you start these things where they're going to go. But you both prove yourself to be reliable and trustworthy people. And as a consequence, I'm delighted to give you far more detail on a regular monthly basis. And I hope you find it very useful.
Jolly good. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. In which case, that's the last of our speakers. Any cabinet member, any other queries they'd like to raise with Malcolm? Lizzie.
It's just a quick comment about the staff morale. I know this is a budget meeting, but as a number of the opposition have mentioned it, of course, even if a member of staff doesn't wish to talk to somebody, we do have regular staff surveys, and those surveys don't reflect what we're hearing today. So if that is not the reality, then they can always use that portal as another way to air their opinions.
Thank you, Lizzie. Thank you for your comment. And Matt, you're going to follow that up with something similar?
Yeah, it's just I just wanted to make a couple of comments about the Adults Directorate and you know, pay tribute to the work. And I'm sure this covers the whole council, but particularly my portfolio and the adults team through what has been an incredibly challenging year. Not only obviously the councils coming together, the continued pressures through COVID and the pressures that puts on the teams. And you know, if you look through the budget, particularly some of the appendices, it gives you a bit more detail. Things like the strengths-based work in the and the TOM model that came to scrutiny a few weeks ago, but the amount of savings that produced last year and is looking to produce this year, you know, we're talking nearly about £5.5 million that needs to be verified, I think, but £2 million in 2021 and quite a considerable amount this year, and there's some in the budget for next year as well. So that's you know, something, talk about transformation, that is working really well and is actually delivering more than we were, you know, banking on, frankly. So I just wanted to pay tribute to that piece of work. And also I and myself, you and the deputy leader, we went to Murray Lodge last week. That's also listed in as one of the pressures in the Adults Directorate, and that is open now and will have a huge difference. And it's in my community in Dustin, and it was fantastic to see. So I really look forward to that making a difference, not only, you know, contributing to my community, but it's also the, you know, the provision that we've got at our hands for adults. But just to, yeah, acknowledge the excellent work the team are doing. Thank you.
Thank you, and we'd support that, Matt. And indeed, Murray Lodge is a wonderful place as well with extra capacity. So fantastic. Just to follow up Lizzie's comments, I was just checking with the Chief Executive to confirm my thought was, and indeed it's correct, we do have a confidential way that staff under real stress or anything can also highlight their concerns, as well as you know, independently contacting Anna. She has open door sessions for staff and a variety of other mechanisms as well. But we'll summarise something so members are aware of these things. I know Sarah's going to do that. Okay, thank you. In which case, if there's no further comments, I'll direct your attention to the recommendations at 3.1. Can I ask you to confirm your agreement to the recommendations, please? Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much. Which takes us on to item 7, once again with Malcolm, capital monitoring for period 7. Malcolm.
Thank you, Chair. There's 2 points I'd like to make on this of significance. The first is that we came into this year with one budget, and we fairly rapidly had to change that. We had list all the projects that had come. I think it was 220 odd, or 222 or something, an enormous number anyway. And clearly that couldn't be the case. So what we did was set up a capital and assets board, which is chaired by Martin and myself on it, and Liz is on it. And that's a very detailed board, and that's all capital projects go through there. And the budget now is 170 million, as you'll see from the report, or close to that. And that's the true opening position that we had once we'd assessed the current projects. There's still, I'm very pleased to say, a large number of projects coming through, and we're particularly looking at those that improve productivity where that can be, because obviously they benefit the revenue line in the fullness of time. So, but we're no shortage of good ideas, and that's the important thing. And as we come to the Treasury Report, I'll demonstrate how we fund them in due course. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Malcolm. Thank you very much. We have 3 councillors registered to speak on this in the following order: Councillor Stone, Councillor Roberts, and then Councillor Harris. Danielle, over to you.
Lovely. And again, thank you for the report and all the information in it. Are the costs that we've been given here, do they include an estimate of increasing costs because of shortage of suppliers and supplies and the length of time things come to fruition? I'm thinking about, you know, inflation is going up, our supply chains are proving to be difficult, but there's also difficulties with building materials, aren't there, at the minute, and all of that, and energy costs and petrol costs, and all of that is going up. So how future-proofed are the figures that you've given us? I know it must be hard to estimate, but I think we need to have some reassurances about how deliverable all those programs are. I'd also like to be invited to Moray Lodge, if you don't mind. I was really excited when I saw that. I think that is probably going to be a model of really excellent practice that I would like to see followed for other provision across the piece. So I'm really delighted about that. Could you explain to me a little bit about school building costs and whether they're recoverable from central government? I don't understand any liable for building costs. And could you let me know in terms of schools funding? I know schools are really up against it at the minute. Are they still having to fund their own COVID prevention measures, or is that a cost that we've taken off their shoulders?
Okay, future.
Oh, the other thing I wanted to raise with you is the disabled facilities grant. There seems to be huge problems with that, and I just would like a bit more explanation of where that one's going. Seems to be issues around, it not being all spent. Huge delays in projects being delivered, and a certain lack of, trust by people who need them in what we're doing.
A few general queries there that might best be dealt with at the monthly meeting or email, Malcolm. Is there anything you want to respond to now? I think Adam then wants to come in on a response.
I would just comment on the inflationary one, which I think is very significant. I mean, you've got to bear in mind, this is the current budget. So we're nearly at the end of this year, but I mean, if you'd have asked me this question a year or two ago, I mean, we didn't, inflation wasn't on the agenda really, but it is now. And that's one of the very good reasons why we've got that capitals board, because that's one of the questions you ask, and I look to Stuart in particular. He's not, most of the projects come that way. And the question is the very questions you just asked, and very difficult to answer, but he gets to have to answer them and gets beaten up if he gets it wrong, I suppose. So there you are. That's the answer to that one. And if we could know where inflation was going, I mean, the general view is it's going to peak and then come back. Well, we'll see, won't we? We've got to assume that's not the case, I think, at this stage anyway. The Moray Lodge invite was an easy one to answer, because that's not within my gift, I'm afraid, but if somebody it is, I'm sure they would invite you. And the rest, I think, are not capital related, but we're very happy to give you comments on it.
Adam and Fiona are going to chip in here. Adam, you were first, I think.
Yeah, more than happy to speak to MPH, Danielle, and arrange a time for you to go down to Moray Lodge. It's well worth a look around. It's a really impressive facility, and we're actually looking into replicating that elsewhere in West Northamptonshire. So I'll contact MPH and then we'll liaise.
I'll be delighted. I have to say, I did phone the leader and tell him how wonderful I thought that whole thing was. It did give me a bit of a lift on a bad day when I read that. So thank you very much for that. There was another question I forgot to ask you, Councillor Longley, and it's about capitalisation. There's no mention of capitalisation in your report, but I understand we are doing some of it. So I wondered where that's being reported.
Martin will pick up on that.
Thank you, Chair. So, yeah, you're right on capitalisation. When we set the budget for this year, for 21-22, we had a strategy on future use of capital receipts and potentially transferring those costs into capital to fund those transformation costs. So there is a plan to do that. It doesn't show in this report because obviously we didn't have an inherited budget for that. This is what this report is showing you, is the budgets that came across, how they've changed since the start of the year. And what we then need to show, picking up your other point, is what the forecast variance is against each one of these lines that's in the appendix, which would then take into account the inflationary increases that you're talking about. But there is a plan to capitalise some of those revenue and other transformation costs. And we set that out in the budget report. I think you asked a question about the funding of education schemes. There's a significant amount of external funding that we get, and it's probably best if I provide a breakdown of that for you so you can see that how that's being used, because that will show which of those schemes are funded using external funding sources and which of those therefore aren't. So I'm happy to pick that up. And then you asked a question about COVID and where the burden of COVID falls. I think that's more of a revenue cost unless you're referring to COVID capital expenditure, so it sits outside of this report.
It was capital expenditure, so I was thinking about ventilation and equipment that the schools need to bring in.
Yeah, just on the point of capitalisation, it's always a debatable argument. Is it capital or is it revenue? And it happens every time. And the test is always at the audit, of course. I mean, the auditors have got to be satisfied that an item is capital or it's revenue, because it can impact your figures enormously. And the case of most cases in industry outside of local government, you try and get as little in capital as much in revenue as you can. So because for tax reasons, that's not the case here. So it's always a debatable point of what is and what isn't. And you look around this room and you can categorize some things yes and some things no. So audit times, internal audit are the people that really have the best say on that one. At the end of the day, you go by what they say. If they agree with it, that's good. If they don't, that's fine. You go left or right. But audit will tell the tale always.
3 quick comments, I think, from the cabinet members who wanted to come in on this, and then we better move on to our next speaker. Fiona, you were going to comment, I think, on some of the questions.
I was just going to reassure Councillor Stone that the Department of Education pick up the tab for schools' need for COVID.
Okay, thank you very much. Matt, you were going to make a comment?
Very quickly on the disabled facilities grant, Councillor Stone might want to have a conversation with Councillor Purser, because there was an item at the Health and Wellbeing Board last week on the disabled facilities grant, and if I can, I'll try and dig the paper out and send it to Councillor Stone. So it basically outlines the commitment to spend the grant, and acknowledges what could happen with the underspend from the previous year. So I was, if I can dig that out and send that.
Yeah, great. And finally, Lizzie, you can make comments, I think.
Yeah, just a very quick one about the construction costs and build projects. As you know, we've got quite an extensive list of those. And in any build project, there is always a contingency. Okay. And part of the reason for that is because, there are areas that you can't foresee, but also in terms of the inflationary costs as well. So viewed at the Capital and Assets Board on a regular basis.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Next speaker on this is Councillor Roberts. Emma, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report. I'm on huge learning curves, as I've said before, and learn a lot from these reports. So thank you. I've got a question on many of the projects and programming that's been carried over from the previous authorities. Do we know how many of them are reliant on a funding provision rather than us spending? And if we're not sure whether we'll get that funding, do we know how much or what our level of borrowing will be expected to be to complete those projects? And then very specifically, there's on page 46, if you're looking at the large numbers, the active travel scheme tranche 2 is labelled as rephasing. My understanding was that on our website, we are still saying that work will be completed this year. In fact, it said within the summer. Obviously, we're well past the summer. I think, number one, we need to update our website on what is happening with that fund, but also could I understand what rephasing really means and what the detail of that is? Because my understanding about that active travel fund and the tranche 2 was that it had to be very specifically spent on a particular area. And if it wasn't, then we may have to give back the funding, but also we would potentially lose future funding of any active travel plans. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll answer the first question, then I'll rely on people with more knowledge than me to answer the second one. The funding position that's the point I think I made about the Capitalist Board. Nothing goes through unless we know where the funding's coming from. Now, it may be grant, it may be this, whatever. And a decision is made of what's for the best, and we make the best judgment we can on that. But the answer is nothing goes through. Well, as far as we're absolutely aware, nothing goes through unless we fund it properly. We would always take that view, always will do.
Active travel. Phil, did you want to chip in, or Stuart's?
Well, perhaps Stuart was more up to date on this than me, but obviously we're still working on active travel plans. There are certain things being considered at the moment. Ideas will be coming forward in due course Obviously, we don't want to lose any money, and we'll do everything we can to make sure that we don't put don't put ourselves at risk of losing any. We'll do everything we can. But we're not going to come forward with silly schemes that the public don't recognise and don't favour, such as the Billing Road scheme that came forward earlier.
Thank you, Chair. Just it specifically, the documentation states it has to be spent on that silly project, as you referred to it. Could we have a, I'm not asking you to deliver it now, Councillor, but could we have a full briefing on the active travel fund, please?
We will look at it, and I think you'll find it will be coming to scrutiny anyway.
Just to endorse what Councillor Larrett said there, we are still looking at the Billings Road area to spend that money. We're working with DFT and the funders to make sure that that money aligns to the requirements of active travel. Obviously, members have raised lots of questions about safety and pedestrian access across there, and we're trying to realign all of those concerns to make sure we've got a project that meets all the objectives that are being put forward. Hence, totally accept the point about the website. And again, thank you for raising that, but happy to provide a briefing as has already been promised on that particular project in the very near future.
Thank you. Thank you. Martin, were you going to comment on one of the points or one of the questions there?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It was just a technical point, really. So you talked, Councillor Roberts, about rephasing. And the schemes that are rephased, and there is a table on table 4 sets out those schemes that are likely to be rephased. What we mean by that is it's slippage, really. The term is known as slippage as well, where we expect that not all of that money will be spent in this financial year, and therefore we have to move it forward into next year, so it's available for next year. So you can see within that table that there's £6.4 million, which we expect not to be spent in the current financial year 21-22, but we roll it forward into 22-23, so it doesn't go away, we don't lose it. It's still there for next year for that project to be completed, but it's just not been completed in line with the original timescales. I think it's a valid question about will we lose the funding associated with some of those schemes. We'll need to go away and have a look at that detail, but the expectation is not.
Thank you, Martin. I'll wait for the briefing because I think we need to look at whether we will lose that funding if we don't spend it quickly.
Thank you very much. Okay, we have one further speaker on this item 7, which is Councillor Harris. Jonathan.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to be fairly parochial on this particular report, actually, and focus on my own ward of Brixworth ward. I've gone through all of the projects, and I can clearly see a EV charge point for Lodge Road. But at the same time, I believe in Daventry, Legacy Daventry time, we had a project agreed for Welford for charge points. I have asked questions several times outside of this forum, but it seems to be very difficult to get an answer. And as it's not listed, I'm looking for clarification and confirmation that that is still going ahead as a project. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Are you able to chip on this, Stuart?
I'm happy to take that one away, Councillor Harris, and make sure that you get an answer, hopefully in the next week, but being Christmas, I'll check that the relevant officers are available, but I'll certainly guarantee you get an answer in the very early new year in regard to that one.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, as I say, I have gone through the appropriate channels and it's just, I'm not going to get anywhere, so that will be helpful. Thank you.
We certainly shouldn't be losing schemes. Thank you. Okay. That was our last speaker. Any further comments on this from any members of the council? Or no, in which case I'll direct your attention to the recommendations at 3.1. Can you just confirm your agreement, please? Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much. Takes us on to item 8, for which there's just one speaker registered. But first of all, over to Malcolm again, just to outline and highlight the key parts of the report. Malcolm.
Yeah, this is the Treasury Report. It's actually, I think, one of the most interesting ones, but they're a bit sad, isn't it, I suppose. Now, what's significant on this one is there's a couple of things on here. The first is I think that this was put out initially, the interest rates forecast were put out at some time in the past, and the position has moved on since then, as we've I think Danielle alluded to. So I think we'll rewrite that one. Doesn't have any serious impact on us, but it's always a thing to get that sort of thing right. The table on loans, the important point there to point out is that the budget originally was we'd have net borrowings, not talking grant, on net borrowings now of 481,482. Year to date is about 423, and we're looking to finish the year with 408. So we're in a situation whereby we've got a good handle on the borrowings at the moment. That's net borrowings, that is. And when you look at the gross borrowings, well, then that's an interesting position as well, because you can read what you like into this, really, because it depends on your point of view. If you look at the borrowings, then just under 80% of those borrowings, if you look at the maturity profile, they're not actually due until in excess of 30 years' time. So we've got it as in terms of cash requirements, a sort of quite a dip for quite a number of years. And if you actually look at that table, you'll see what I mean by that. That was primarily brought about, as much as anyone, by a change of when we transferred quite a lot of cash in NCC and put it back at lower rates down the line. The other, probably the most important thing to jump off the page here on this report is the MRP policy change. That's the minimum requirement provision. Now, this is a bit of a conceptual number, and I've never come across it anywhere else other than local government, is where there's an attempt to put a number on the borrowing so that the councils actually stack up sufficient cash that they can actually pay their borrowings when maturity dates actually arrive. We haven't got that problem, but that's what we do anyway. And what happened in NCC was the auditors, always an argument. Anyway, ended up with agreeing a particular set of conditions that went into the figures, signed off and all the rest of it. The new auditors, which you got, don't agree with that view. And, so whether they're right, whether they're wrong is still in debate. But in the case that they are right, just in case they are, and we might have to go along with them anyway, there's £1 million was put into the MRP provision that in fact impact our bottom line. So the 1.8 we're now looking at in period 8, £1 million of that is this MRP provision. Does anybody want me to continue on? We're still awake, are you? Okay, so that's the Treasury Report, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Malcolm. As I say, one speaker, and that's Councillor Stone. Danielle.
Thank you. Corporate scrutiny is going to be looking at Treasury management on a task and finish group, and I really look forward to that because I do think it's not usually a very well looked into area by members. So, and I think it probably ought to be. So I quite look forward to that. I have got a couple of questions. Don't tell me we really have £74 million cash just lying in a bank somewhere, surely. Have we really got, am I reading something wrong there? I think it would be really useful to know where our money actually is. Where it, I looked in the report, I'm not being told in this report where it actually is, but, given Iceland and things like that, I think it would be good for us to know where it is. I was surprised to see that we were giving Cornwall, repaying Cornwall, who is the poorest of all poor authorities, £5 million back. So that means we must have borrowed money from them. So I'd quite like to know if we're borrowing money from any other local authorities. And in that connection, I have asked this question a number of times, but never had an answer. Are we still part of the Municipal Bonds Agency? Because I know that the county did invest, I think it was £2 million. Councillor Colby might remember better than me. And I'm just curious about whether we've still got money invested there and if we are ever intending to borrow through that agency. So just a little bit curious about that one. And I am quite pleased in the direction of travel with our level of borrowing. I have to say, I think that's quite good. Do we have a cap on what our borrowing is? We must have. Is that the figure that you've given us here, the 482 million?
I'll come to that now.
Okay, quite a few points there. Malcolm, are you able to respond to some of them now?
Straightforward. Well, let's talk about reserves. You will remember when reserves disappeared, and we're never going to let that happen. I will be coming to reserves on the budget for next year and telling you what the numbers we're proposing are. But broadly speaking, we would expect, and I'm sort of preempting it, but I'll tell you now, as you brought the subject up, broadly speaking, we were always thinking in terms of about 100 million is about right. And 100 million would be made up of pretty much 60 million earmarked reserves. So, you know, that's definitive statement. So, and about 40, which last chance saloon stuff, you know, if we get into that, then we're in problems, and I wouldn't intend to do that. So that would typically be what our reserves. And with regard to the borrowings, with it between councils, quite normal. You would find that all councils borrow, it's a measly rate, but we would borrow from Cornwall at times, and they might borrow from, and any one of this, very common thing to happen. Very, very substantial amounts of money happens all the time. So that's not unusual, particularly. I mean, it happened to be Cornwall, could be anybody, could be anybody. I can't for the life of me remember what happened to the Municipal Bonds Agency, but you have brought it up before, and I do remember. We'll ferret that one out. It's 2 million quid. I don't know where it is tonight anyway, but we'll find it. And on the capital, the cap, if you look, I think it's on the report, should be somewhere. I think it was eight. Yeah, there you go. Authorized limit for external debt is 850 million. Well, we ain't going anywhere near that. And you know, so you know, we're way down on that. And I'm still of the opinion that we should be slow in borrowing down. And if you look at the last, I take you back to NCC, 3 years, balance the books, reduce borrowings, and we increase the reserves. And that's what we're trying to do here. Not so much we're at reserves, got enough, we're well placed there. But borrowings, keep a cap on it. Always bad news, have borrowing, especially with inflation going up. It's going to be not good. So we're looking to keep that. And certainly, I would be absolutely on my dead body to get anywhere near that number. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Malcolm.
And where's our money? Where is it?
The 74 million, that would be the reserve money.
But where is it?
Where's it held? Yeah.
Through you, Chair. So yes, there is a list of where our investments are held, which we can supply to you. It is cash that we've got. It goes out to various financial institutions and the local authorities, and we have a list that sets that out, so we can circulate that to you.
Very good. Thank you. Any other cabinet member have any questions at all for Malcolm on this, or any comments at all? No, in which case, if I may, I'll direct your attention to the recommendations, which are this occasion at section 4. Can I just ask you to confirm your agreement, please, to the recommendations? It's agreed. Thank you very much. This takes us on to item 9, which is the draft budget and the medium-term financial plan. We've actually 8 speakers registered. Councillor Meredith was, but has been unable to join us this evening. So we have 7 speakers, in fact. But first of all, over to you, Malcolm, just to pick out any highlights for us.
Well, I'm glad to see such interest. That's a good start. Now, I don't intend to drone through this for you, bore you all senseless. You've all got the report. Hopefully it's in an easily read form. And I think that I would point out to begin with that this is a draft budget. So we're very interested in any input anybody might have. It's not a finalized item. There's a, as you probably see in the report, there is a timeline, a schedule, and so any input is always grateful to see. You don't have the monopoly on good ideas by any means. The first thing is that I think that the settlement has come through. This is based on a settlement that Lots of assumptions made by Martin and his crew, and they're pretty close. But we were about 0.3 out of our assessment. However, there was, out of the blue, an additional grant came through of 3.5. So the settlement is actually 3.8 better than we're showing here, which is a good starting point. The headlines, right, it's balanced for 22-23, as you can plainly see, anybody that's read through it. And that shows, that starts with an increase of 1.99% and 1% on the social precept, which gives us the 2.99. Now, there's lots of ins and outs and what have you, and that's is a very detailed thing which I'm not going to bore you all with tonight. But the net effect is that gives us about just £10 million additional. But there's pressure due to growth and things like that in excess of 16, there's productivity involved, and all these are in the mix. The biggest risks that we have at this moment, in my opinion, is inflation. And I think you alluded to it earlier, and I think that's right. And wage growth, I think we've covered the wages in here, as you'll see, and that no doubt will come out in the discussion. But you know, if inflation carries on, there's contract inflation. It's not good news for us, you know, because of course it's a moving feast. So that's the biggest risk I think we've got here. Now, the way we've approached this is that this financial year, we've been working on the basis that we had 4 councils coming together, need to see where we are, sort it out, and try and get a firm footing. Well, I think we never quite get there, but we're well entrenched on that one. This budget that I'm putting, this draft budget I'm putting before you tonight, is the intention is to be the stabilisation year. So we've shaken it all up, got where we are, and stable next year, which would give us a very strong position going forward. That's the objective. So we're not trying to scale any heights here. We're trying to get a good, stable, no nonsense budget in here. That's the objective. It's quite interesting how we came about this. We started off with what's called a star chamber. I don't know why it's called that, but that's what we called it. And the first evidence we got in was that we'd be 21 million overspent. So we've gone back again, and lo and behold, we were 1.5 underspent. So we've gone to all the directives. We had an away morning and decided what else we could add in, you know, what things were really pressing. So there was room for that, and that's what we've done. There's some technical adjustments, but they're more of a clean-up operation than anything else. So they're not really the sort of thing that go into detail if you need them. And we intend to maintain the 5 million contingency. Rebecca, I'm a clear convert there now, you can understand. Now, there's the council tax reduction scheme that's staying exactly as it is this year. So it goes on to next, and I think we've discussed that. And there's some benefits there for care leavers and war widows, which you'll all be aware of. And then we go into fees and charges. That's you know, so we're trying to keep up with inflation there, but I think we've probably undershot it there. Don't know what's likely to happen, but we'll see. And then we move on to reserves, and reserves there, as I say, I think I've already explained that. We're looking at circa 100 million. Doesn't have to be exact, it can be a little bit above, a little bit below, and it will rise and fall with the earmarked reserves, which currently are running at about 60 million in this one here, but they'll come up and down as the months go through. But the 40 million is the key reserve of last resort, and we don't want to go anywhere near that. So that's we've got risk reserves in there. We've got a capital program, as you've seen. So that really, I think, is the highlights, and I'm sure there'll be lots of questions of that. But I'm not proposing here to necessarily respond. If there any detail one about this little point here, little point there, unless Martin got it off the cuff, or but we're very pleased if you've got that sort of question, stick them in an email. Be very pleased to answer them. And in fact, they might well give us a spark of light as well, Martin. You never know, do you? So that, Chair, is my brief summary.
Thank you, Malcolm. Of course, this will go out to consultation, give people the opportunity to think about it even further. Our first speaker is Councillor Roberts. Emma, over to you. Just so you're aware, the following speakers are in the order of Councillor Randall, Councillor Stone, Councillor Purser, Councillor Alva, Councillor Beardsworth, and then Councillor Harris. Emma, over to you.
Thank you. Again, loads of detail, and I want to really thank Martin for going through the information with me, because that was incredibly helpful. My first question is, are we balancing because of the number of vacancies that we've got, and will we balance in the future because of the number of vacancies that we've got? Is that the only reason? We talked before about service provision and whether or not we were budgeting for a service provision that was good, or just one that was just what we were providing anyway. And I think you said, Councillor Longley, that when you first worked with the directorates, it was about 21 million over, did you say? My worry there is that because that was to provide the appropriate service, and now we're not, again, providing the service. I'd like to see, you won't be surprised, a fully costed provision for the Living Wage Foundation pay, both internally and externally. I have asked the question of both the Chief Exec and of Martin, so I haven't just left the question to here, Councillor Longley, because I do believe it should be there. I want to understand what the difference would be. And as a suggestion for the budget and how that should develop, for me, that's a huge point that we've got to consider. And I think you said at full council, when the motion was voted down, that it wasn't the right time to do it then, but the budget was the right time to do it. So I really do hope we include the Living Wage Foundation pay, both in the current union offer and in the future years figures. I wasn't going to talk about this, but it was mentioned briefly about the Tom-based model and the efficiencies that have come out of that, and Councillor Golby relied on those efficiencies. Just to be clear, scrutiny have said that those efficiencies aren't seen tangibly at the moment, and we need better evidence of those efficiencies. And we need to make sure that we are analysing and speaking to the people who are seeing those savings. And then just on the DFG information as well, because that was referenced, I can share the report with Councillor Stone. It's only a couple of slides long. Again, scrutiny will need to revisit that because that is definitely not being considered appropriately at the moment. Delivery of any efficiencies or savings that are mentioned within the report is reliant upon transformation capacity, as far as I see it, and that's linked to staff. And if we've got all of those vacancies, how are we going to transform, and therefore how are we going to keep the efficiencies that are there? And then finally, it'd be remiss of me not to mention my concern over the council tax rise. It's the poorest that are going to pay, as far as I can see, and to balance the budget and have the budget as is, we're going to have to increase council tax, which is what you are intending to do. As an authority, we've agreed to develop an anti-poverty strategy, but we're putting council tax up. My understanding also is that council tax next year will have a reduced amount that it can be put up by, and I think it's going to be 2%. So I just wonder how we've factored that into our future work and the future budgets. We're making our people pay. The government settlement that's been awarded to us still only looks at 1 year, not a 4-year, as has been called by many, and it doesn't give us a safe headway moving forward. Thank you.
Okay, the first point I think is on the vacancies. That's a very important one. Then what's in this budget is an assumption that we have 4% vacancies. And the reason we have that assumption, because that's what we expect. If you've got a better number, I'd be pleased to hear it, but that's what's in there. Anyway. That's why it's no secret. We always put some of that in as a budget because that's the expectation. That's history has proven that to be the case. So, in fact, history has proven to be a lot bigger than that. So it's probably might be an understatement. Don't know. But that's what's in there anyway. 21 million over. These are very competent directors came through. What directors being competent, and I do exactly the same, is they make sure they don't get it wrong as best they can. And when you actually look through it in detail, and you usually can, first shot's always over the top, always is. And you sort of hone it down to what is a sensible and proper. And these are competent people. They don't agree to things they can't do. I would be staggered if they did, and I'd be very upset if they did. They're competent people, and I expect them to do it, and they do. Living wage, well, I think we've covered the wage situation here as best we could. You've got to bear in mind, that this inflation thing is an ongoing thing. We don't know where it's going, and that will tell the tale as the time goes on, I'm quite sure. But the commitments in there for the quarter above the national, we thought that what we would do there was that we would we'd leap ahead of the pack. That was the objective. Now, had to keep up with this pack. We think that was a pretty good shot. At the time we did, and we'll see where it goes as time goes on, of course. But that was the best shot we did at the time. We thought we were doing rather well there till we saw inflation. The transformation budget, I think I've spoken about that earlier, that we're changing the way we go about that. And hopefully that will improve its performance, but also it'll be more open to scrutiny and to anybody else that's interested. Now, you say the poorest who are going to pay because of the council. You can have both ways. We've got a budget to meet, so therefore we put what we think is a sensible way forward, given the scenario we're in. However, there is, of course, the council tax reduction scheme. So the poorest actually don't pay that full amount. They pay a lesser amount. So and there's always that hardship fund as well. You must not forget about that. So we think we've got the balance as best we can, and that's all you can say on these matters, because you never get it absolutely perfect for everybody. There's always somebody getting more or somebody less, but broadly, we think we've got a decent balance there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Councillor Randall. Wendy.
Yes, thank you. I'd also got a question on the council tax. My understanding is that we can only raise the council tax, the core council tax, by 1.99% before we trigger a referendum. And we're also allowed the council tax social care element of it at a maximum of 1%. But I note that only Northampton fall below the 2.99%, which come in at 2.29. South Northampton is 3.34 and Daventry come in at 4.10%. So if those two other areas are above that level for calling a referendum, how do you get over that? Thank you.
We're West Northants, Wendy. No, let me just another point there. What you're seeing there is the effect of the leveling
Harmonisation.
Harmonisation. Thank you, Chair. And what you'll look at there is there are winners and losers in this, as there always were going to be. There was last year, well, this current year, and there will be next year. And I think we agreed to do it over 3 or 4 years. 3 years, was it? Yeah. My personal view was we should have done it in 1 year. That was the time. Other people thought 3 years, some thought longer. The net effect is we all decided on 3 years. So you'll see it the same situation again next year because of that.
Okay, and the other thing to know, obviously, is we have no idea, I assume, what the percentage increase is going to be on the Police and Crime Commissioner and Fire Commission, and also parish councils are now picking up a lot more services. So we're also going to get higher increases from them. And obviously, they've got no cap, have they? Before they call a referendum, they can just what theirs up at whatever percentage. So, for a lot of residents, this is going to be a huge increase. And what you really need to look at is whether these increases are going to drop people below the poverty line.
Yeah, two points there. The first is the Police and Crime Commission. Martin's just informed me that's actually been published now, so it's issued, so it's out there to view that one. As far as the parish council is concerned, it's a very, very small part of the total budget in percentage terms. It's minute, and yeah, they have no cap. But as a member of the parish council I'm in, and you do that at your peril. You know? So you know, they really are close to the coal face, and well, my experience of them, they're very sensible at these things and don't do anything. They don't actually have to. But it's not going to have a serious impact on the overall figure because of the percentage in total terms is so small. So that's been my view on that, Wendy.
I'll come back to you when I look at all those percentage figures when we get them. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Councillor Stone.
Great, thank you. Corporate scrutiny at its last meeting, Councillor Longley made a couple of recommendations and asked a question, and I know they've all been picked up, but I just thought it would be useful for me to mention them. So we had I thought it was a really good presentation from APSI, so the Association of Public Service Excellence. And I think the recommendation that has been agreed is that they would also make a presentation to the working group that's looking at added social value. For me, this is a really exciting thing. So I'm really pleased that recommendation is being taken forward. Another recommendation was that it came from Councillor Bidsworth actually, so I don't want to steal her thunder too much, but it was the suggestion that we just had a terribly, terribly simple front sheet for the consultation, which showed where our income comes from and what the big expenditures were, so that people, before they got into the detail of the budget, just could see what the constraints and limitations were really. So I think that's going to be taken forward as well. So thank you for that. And then the question was, what are the circumstances where it's agreed to have an urgent item of expenditure, and with reference to the NPH lease that was, and what governs the agreement to have delegated powers around things like that. So scrutiny would really like a written answer to that particular question. But if I move on to your report, I'm very mindful, because I was on that committee, that we've got an aspiration to be a really great council in 5 years' time. I don't think your government, as a Conservative administration here, I don't think your government is helping us to do that, to be perfectly honest with you. We've been promised 4-year budget so that we've got a lot of certainty and we can plan better. We've had the opposite of that in the settlement, where we've got one-off grants which are useful for 1 year, but leave us not knowing what to do for years 2, 3 and 4. I think we've been forced into a situation that none of us would choose, where we're over-reliant on council tax and business rates. I really do think this council, along with all the other councils, need to make very strong representation to government that everybody is saying this is an unsustainable position. It cannot carry on. Something has got to happen. We cannot go on, particularly when we're seeing such high levels of poverty and a collapse in local economies. We cannot go on forcing businesses and forcing local residents to be paying our way like that. We already pay very high taxation, and we need a much fairer funding formula coming out of the government. I hope that you agree with me on that one.
Thank you. Malcolm, did you want to comment on those points at all?
Well, the only really point, the two points I think came out that you want. So the summary sheet, that's a very good idea. That's always an easy to read sheet, is when you get a car or anything like that, and you get the easy stuff. So I'd offer that. The government not helping on a 4 year. We deal with what we got, and, whether it be 4 year or 1 year. I mean, we make predictable. Martin and his very capable team make predictions, and it's been pretty accurate so far. But as I say, you just deal with it's 1 year, it's 1 year. The more information we got, the easier life would be, of course, and I wouldn't disagree with that. But that's what we've got, so that's what this is all based on. So,
thank you. Our next speaker is Councillor Purser. Bob.
Thank you, Chair. I thought I'd focus on just the adult care budget, because that's a major item of the local authorities' responsibilities and the huge issues, I'm sure. I suppose the first question, I've got three questions. One is about the Chancellor is increasing national insurance in order to pay additional money for social care. How much of that will be coming to us next year? How much additional social care money will come as a result of our 1.25 additional national insurance, which we will have to be paying for all our staff? I'm hoping this is going to be a positive figure. So that's my first question. The second is, we've looked in scrutiny at the ICANN and TOM initiatives. These seem to me hugely complicated initiatives. And I wonder, what's the risk involved there? Are we sure? It seems there are lots of ducks moving in a lot of directions at the same time. And can we be sure that they're all going to end up with the figure that you end up here? Or is this a risky area of our work? So that's my second question about the kind of the risk associated with Tom. And the third issue, which we've, in a way, we've covered in other places, but if we've got inflation going along at 5%, and we've got an issue about recruiting care staff and retaining care staff, is our current offer to our care staff going to be sufficient given the rate of inflation that we're facing, so that we were hoping that we could gain ground in terms of recruiting care staff, retaining care staff. With the rate of inflation, are we actually going to be losing them? So those are my three questions.
Thank you, Bob. Excellent questions. Malcolm, do you want to start? I think colleagues may chip in on some of these other areas. Matt, I think, wants to come in.
Yeah, thanks very much. I'll just deal with the first one, the adult care one, with the national insurance increase cost to us will be 767,000 in our estimate. However, fortune is such that I forget what we call it, with the care fund, and has come in at 982,000. So we're actually marginally better off, but that's as we sit today. We'll see what events bring.
So that doesn't give us a lot more for improving services, which is meant to.
That's what it is. That's the question. That's what it is. Is this risky? Is this budget? Of course, it's risky. You know, I mean, wouldn't it be easy if I could be absolutely predictable? And as I said earlier on, you'll never hear me say confident, because I'm never confident on these things, because the world changes by the day. And we all know that. I mean, and this is our best shot at this tick of the clock. And if you ask me again in 3 months' time, there might be quite a different story. I don't know. We'll see, because it's a draft budget anyway. And if you ask me in a year's time, well, what do you think? You know, but that's our best shot at this point in time. And it's always going to be like that. And we'll and with inflation going like it's going, that wasn't predicted some months ago. None of us predicted that. Certainly I didn't. And if you look at our Treasury people, they certainly didn't either. And so you've got to deal with things as they come along. And that's the nature of management. I mean, that's what we're here for. And where a simple thing that inflation was flat and everything was predictable, one thing, well, they didn't need us lot, do they? So all I can say to you is, of course, it's risky. Everything's risky, but it's not a shot in the dark. That's a good shot at this point in time, and that's our prediction. And if the circumstances change, then we will change. Thanks.
Thank you. Now, there's a couple of questions. There's the risk, a bit more risk around ICANN, and also inflation versus recruitment, particularly in care. Matt, did you want to chip in with a couple of comments there?
Yeah, sure. As far as the NI point is concerned, I don't think that money has come through, any money's come through to us yet, and it's not quite clear what's going to come and when. So we'll have to see what happens in that regard. In terms of ICANN and Tom, all the ICANN money that has been spent so far has come from health partners, and I'm sure you appreciate as well as I do, Bob, it is very complex by its very nature because of all the different component parts. And I think, and as Katie mentioned at the scrutiny session we had in here, I'd seen those presentations about 5 or 6 times now, and it does still seem quite complex. But you know, the more you see them and the more you get to learn about how the component parts of the system work together, you can sort of start and get a clearer picture of what needs to happen to make, you know, to get better outcomes for people and create efficiencies for the system. But I don't think you know, it's an issue in terms of it's the wrong thing to do. I think it's very clear that the TOM work, we've clearly seen the financial benefits for us as a council and for a system, but the important part, it's about better decision making for residents and getting better long-term outcomes, and I think that is the right thing to do. In terms of the staff and inflation, the council is currently looking at establishing a fair cost of care, and that's going to inform how you know, we're going to make decisions in the future. And then the big point of tonight is about budget setting. We've got to look at, frankly, what we can afford to pay. We want to pay the, you know, the best rates and the most we can for our care staff, particularly because, you know, they perform an incredibly difficult job, and frankly over the years that's their role has been poorly valued, and we need to raise the profile and raise the value of those staff and the role they play. But I hope there are some positive announcements we can make soon with regard to some of our care staff and some of our lowest paid staff. But like I say, there is a fair cost of care exercise going on at the moment, and hopefully that will really show us what we need to pay to be competitive and to, you know, keep and retain people. And you know, hopefully looking forward we can make a better job of looking after that set of staff. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Let's look out for a now on that in turn. Thank you. Next speaker is Councillor Alva Harvey. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair. My question is, public bodies have the power to support the local economy. Will this budget go any way to do? Will we be trying to keep our money locally? So that's a question for that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. That's a good question. Malcolm, did you want to comment and possibly Lucy too?
Yeah, I mean, this is always a difficult balance, isn't it? But again, we've got two responsibilities here. We've got responsibilities to do the best by this council and our ratepayers, and you know, so we that wouldn't necessarily drive us in a local way, but equally, we've got it's a big budget, one of the biggest in the area, and wherever we can buy locally, we would do so. And employment is the biggest input, of course, to the local economy, and that's. But yeah, I mean, the sentiment is well received, and we're well understood, and we wouldn't do any different. It's like when you buy a car or something like that. What do you do for the best? And you'd all like to buy British if you can, and I don't think you can now, but you know. We make the best judgment we can in that situation, and the sentiment is absolutely right. If we can do it locally, we always. It's just a general ethos that I think I don't think anybody would say we do it differently.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else want to add anything? Lucy, is there anything to add or no? If you wish to, yes. Sorry.
Yeah. Did I look like I wanted to say something? I was just going to say, as far as procurement and the contracts that we have with developers and all the building that's going to be going on in Northampton, wherever possible, we are going to source locally. That would be part of our ethos. That's not to say we can always do that, but we would always look to source locally and to you know, to employ locally as well.
Thank you. That's a good question. Much appreciated. Two speakers remaining. Councillor Beardsworth is first, then Councillor Harris. Sally.
Thank you. My list is in no way in order of importance. Let's put it that way first. I think I totally agree with what Councillor Stone has said. We have been underfunded for years, and I think that's the fault of central government. I do have concerns about the increase in charges to country parks, because we are so lucky in Northampton. We have lots and lots of parks that people can use for recreation and outdoor activities, which is so important at the moment with COVID. And yet we're putting up charges on country parks, which people enjoy. And Brixworth in particular is a bad one, because you have to pay for a whole day when you go there. If you just want to go for a walk, get some fresh air, walk your dog, it's a charge that is for the whole day, and it's stopping people going, basically. So I think it's something you could look at. But I think, you know, we are putting their council tax up a lot, the people in South Northampton, Daventry, and this is another whammy, considering we don't charge people to use our parks in Northampton. So maybe you could review that for me. The second thing I'd like to say is I have real concerns. We have a rapidly aging population, and we need help to keep people in their own homes. And that's why I was disappointed to see the cut in the optimization of disability facility grants, because if we want to, people want to stay in their own home as long as possible. I know I do. I don't want to go into a nursing home. I'd rather, you know, go to the vets. But it's true. The doctors won't do it, but the vets will. But I want to stay in my own home, and as long as I can, and if we've got the facility to keep people in their own home, it's much better for their mental health, it's much better for their activities, and if we can do that. You've also cut the homeless removal of 100k for people of support may lose their homes. Now, we're going to go through a disastrous winter. Am I right or am I not? It says homeless removal 100k for people for support of people who may lose their homes or homeless. Am I wrong in that one? Okay.
Quite sure that was Sally. We think it might be a productivity.
Brackets. I presume it was a cut.
Yeah.
The reason I'm saying that is we're going to go through a very, very difficult winter through nobody's fault, because we've got huge increases in gas prices and electricity prices. We've got food going up dramatically in the shops. Petrol's going up. Everything is going to cost more. And people on low incomes are really going to suffer. And I've also noticed you've cut the council tax hardship fund. Now, that's by 500k. I'm just concerned that we are cutting off a lot of the lifelines to people that might be able to stay in their own home if we can actually have these hardship funds. Now, the whole point of the hardship fund is that a lot of people don't know about it, so probably people haven't claimed in the past. But I think we need to look at that again, because I think we are going in for a very, very bad winter this winter, not with just COVID, but with everything else going up and people not being able to go to work as they should, especially in the hospitality, you know, when they do casual labor. There's lots of things that could impact. Those are the things I'm really concerned about. So it's the disability facility grants, the hardship fund, and the removal of people that might lose their homes. And that's quite possible because we've had a ban on evictions for quite some time. They're going ahead now, but I think we're going to have a lot of problems in that way. So those are my concerns. It's not the whole thing, but I think they're the ones I would highlight you to reflect on to see if we can actually help people that need help, because I think that's what the council's here for, as well as providing services.
Thank you, Sally. We're quite a bit over time there. Obviously, it's not the council tax reduction scheme that remains in place on the hardship funds, isn't it? Malcolm, do you want to comment on any of those, and perhaps we'll bring others in?
Yeah, I was going to comment on a couple, and Martin's going to come in because a few of them are actually pretty detailed, but we probably got some answers for you here now. The first one, a country parks increases. I mean, I walk around Brixton fairly regularly. It's a marvellous place, isn't it? Now, you've always got a problem with this sort of thing, when with increases in charges generally, is what you want to avoid is nothing, 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 and then a great big peak. That goes. So you try and keep it as best you can on a regular basis. It keeps out with inflation. Now, take your point that you know, you pay for a day if you go. I mean, usually when I go around, it takes me 2 hours to walk around, and so I've always got my money's worth, frankly, and so. Yeah, no, I take your point. Take your point, and we'll have but this is a draft budget. It's all for discussion, so that's the point we'll take. Now, on a bit of a lighter note, hope your husband doesn't send you down the vets, but we'll leave it at that one, shall we? But Martin wants to comment on a couple of the particulars, if that's okay.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to make a general point about service reduction. So there's no service reductions within this budget. So when you talked about the homeless reduction and reducing that service by £100,000, that's not a reduction to the service. I've found within Appendix B6 the line that you're referring to, and it's about reviewing how that service is run and making an efficiency or a productivity saving as a result of that. So it isn't about reducing the service. It's about providing it in different ways so that you can take your saving out, so you make an efficiency gain. So I just wanted to highlight that point and to reinforce the general point that there are no service reductions within these proposals generally. There are reductions in budgets, but they are efficiency or productivity gains. The second point I wanted to make was on the Council Tax Hardship Fund. So you're absolutely right, excessive Council Tax Hardship Fund in this financial year of £500,000. There's been very little use of it. It was always agreed to set it up as a one-off fund, and all that you're seeing in there in the technical adjustments is reversing that one-off fund back out of the base budget. So it's not, we haven't spent all of that money. Any balance that's left we will carry forward into 22-23, and that funding will still be available until the £500,000 has been completely exhausted.
Chair, if I may, I was a county councillor for 16 years, and I didn't know we had a hardship fund for council tax. Otherwise, I would have referred people to it.
And so you do have a hardship fund at the moment. We're not planning to get rid of that hardship fund. Whatever's left at the end of this financial year, we will carry forward, and it will still be able to be used for hardship cases.
Okay, a couple of others are going to come in. Adam, you're going to make comments, I think, then Phil.
Thank you, Chairman. Martin's covered much of the point that I was going to make, just to reassure Councillor Bearsworth that there isn't a cut to the homelessness provision that we're putting forward. There's simply a better provision that means that we can find an efficiency elsewhere. And in fact, just yesterday we announced the launch of the Safe and Sound Winter Accommodation Programme. So we continue to bid for funding from central government to provide new and better forms of temporary accommodation that will lead on to permanent accommodation. So rest assured.
I'm delighted with that, Adam, but the whole point, we don't get that information in the line that we read. So we have to ask the question. And I would like to go to actually went there when it was closed, when they were closing it last time.
Right.
So I'd like to see it reopened.
Okay, thank you. Phil, you're going to comment?
Yeah, can I just comment on the country parks, because I note the disparity between Daventry Country Park and Brixton Country Park. We are in the process of bringing all the park service together for a West Northamptonshire park service, which will encompass parks in Northampton, the country parks, and parks here in Towcester. And I think as when we do that, and once we've got the service as one of the first things we need to do is look at the cost of parking, because I mean it's £2.20 a day proposed for Daventry, and Brixworth is significantly more. Whereas when you look at the season ticket, it's £51, I think 50 for Brixworth for a season ticket, whereas it's £70 for Daventry. Now that to me doesn't seem totally
It needs
comparable,
harmonising, doesn't
and
it?
we'll have to do some levelling up on that. So be assured that once we've got the park service working as one, that's what we'll look at.
Right, thank
Seeing
you.
I'm not coming back, can I wish you all a very happy and healthy Christmas?
Very kind of you. Thank you. Likewise to you. Rebecca, you're going to come in with a comment.
Just briefly to reassure Councillor Bearsworth that I think most NCC county councillors didn't know about the hardship fund because it only came into existence this year, this financial year, and it was a fund set up specifically to help those who are adversely affected by the harmonisation of the council tax reduction scheme.
Yeah, thank you. That's a very good point. That's how I understood it to be. Thank you. Okay, we have one further speaker, Councillor Harris. Jonathan.
Thank you, Chair. I'm glad to hear Brixworth on the map tonight quite a few times, and I would echo those comments in terms of equilibrium of charges there. There is a further point in the budget actually in regards to car park charges. I note that Daventry are also getting charge increases in residence permits, but no other charge increases in the borough. So again, could that also be included as part of that review or checking over, because it does seem to be a differential occurring there. A couple of points of clarification. I heard earlier there is this £3.8 million additional funds. But that isn't obviously costed into this budget. Presumably that will be reworked and we will get a reviewed version of that. Would it be possible, 6.42 refers to the service improvement investments of £1.7 million. It's very headline. It gives us the figures of investment and it talks broadly about what the issues are, such as the £887,000 on highway staff. It would be very useful to have full detail on what those roles are and how we expect them to add value back into the service. I can't see any specifics other than the figure itself and the reference line, no other detail. Same also for the 120,000, 23,000 on the comms team. And similarly, the 100,000 on sustainability resource. It would be very useful to have the detail behind the expectation as to what that's actually going to be spent on. I would also want to make comments on the increases. I would say this, wouldn't I, being an ex-Daventry councillor? Of course, we've got the highest council tax rise. I appreciate that this is part of the harmonisation process, but nonetheless, it is a stark differential in terms of the people in the old Daventry area. The point I really want to make about this is the press release said 2.99%. It said, to quote, the budget assumes a council tax increase of 2.99%. It didn't say an average of 2.99%, and I think that's quite fundamental. You know, the word average is quite key in this issue, and I think if we're putting communications out there, we need to be very clear about it. I know that will create issues, I'm sure, with residents in Daventry if they've seen the press release and then actually realise that their increase is actually higher than 2.99. They're the main points. I think that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Jonathan. Malcolm?
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. Well, the 3.8, will it be reworked? As you probably know, yeah, of course it will. It's come from, you know, that was unexpected. We were expecting, well, expecting what we put in here. But we were, as it turned out, we were 300 better off, which is good, you know, on the right side, marginal. Nothing that wouldn't have seriously impacted it. But to have a 3.5 on top of that was excellent. So, yeah, good news. On item 6.42, that's an interesting point, really, because you heard me mention earlier about the underspend of 1.5 at the second chamber. Well, we went back to all the directors and everybody we got round and cabinet, and those are the items that came out that we ought to knit back into the budget, which is what's happened. That's what you'll actually find them in an B4 appendix. So very small writing. So, Daventry, well, I think I've explained that earlier on why that is, and that's nothing to do about that. And always go back. Should be doing it in 1 year, 2 year, 4 years. That's what we did. Well, in fact, you were part of it at the time, as I recall. So Rebecca, and so was I. So that's what we did. And the 2.99 average, fair point. That we put it out, and the people that would have put it out would have been thinking West Northants, of course. And but you know, I live in Daventry district, and I'll get emails on that for sure. You know, as everybody will say, hey, it's not 2.99, it's whatever is the very point you made. And then I'll spend quite a considerable amount of time trying to explain the situation. But yeah, and if you're in Northampton Borough, of course, you're better off. So you don't get any emails there. So, okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. That was our last speaker. Any other comments at all from Cabinet members? Questions? Phil, you want to chip in?
Can I just say, Chair, how much I welcome the investment that this budget provides for my areas of responsibility. I think we know that highways and other departments, similar non-statutory aspects of the work that this council does, has suffered significantly over the years. And we're now in a position where we can start to rectify that. And that's what this budget does. All those aspects listed in 6.42 will enable us to better monitor the new highways contract, which we've certainly got to get right from the very outset. It will enable us to develop highway schemes to have them shelf ready, so that when the government or SEMLEP turn around and say, has anybody got a scheme for to do something in the region of 3 or 4 million quid, we've got something sitting on the shelf and we can put it up, put our plate up to it. Additional investment in refuse and recycling. Yes, we need to manage the contracts better. We need to increase recycling rates. That will go towards helping that. Promotion of bus services, that links with paragraph 6.48. And that's funding, restoring some of the subsidy that's been lost to bus service, particularly rural bus services. And it also enables us with the other aspect of it to deliver on the bus improvement plan that we've been developing. Of course, investment to drive forward sustainability and green agenda, very, very important. And we've got to have the resources to do that. A transport fleet manager, we haven't got anybody managing the fleet. And, it's somewhere where there's been a severe lacking in resource. And again, putting that right by getting in a fleet manager. Again, trees, which is a significant importance to members. We have a scrutiny panel working on a tree policy and a tree strategy, and this will fund a post to actually deliver that strategy and drive that forward. We recognise that there are issues in the south area of West Northamptonshire. There's only one street sweeper. We're going to double that and put in another street sweeper to keep the roads clear. Investment in young driver training. There used to be courses at Silverstone. We're restoring those to, we know the problems with young drivers and we know the lives that are lost. So, yes, we want to restore that service and do what we can to support young drivers in being safe on the roads. And the investment in the flood service, some of that is to do with the disaggregation from the north, but also we're bringing back in-house some of the flood investigation works, and that will lead to a better service. As I say, we talked about funding of the bus service improvement plan, and HS2 Marshall is most important. Anybody who's been down to that area of south of the area will see what's going on there, and we need to manage it. We need to ensure that damage that's being done to our roads is repaired by HS2. We need to make sure they adhere to the planning conditions. We need to make sure that what they plant grows, and if it doesn't, we make them replant it. There's so much work to do down there, and that's a vital role as I see it. Obviously, switching off the bus lane camera has had a financial impact, and we've managed to bring that back on board, make the budget provision to allow for that. But that said, we are looking at taking further powers to enable us to enforce in other areas, such as box junctions and no right, left or U-turn movements and things like that. So we may recover, if we get those powers, some of the lost income from that particular bus camera. But that's something that's ongoing throughout the year. And obviously, we've talked about active travel, and we've put in additional resource to develop that policy and that strategy. I think, Chair, it's a fantastic budget for my area of responsibility, and I do welcome this investment in the service area. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. That's an excellent summary of the things happening, as you say, in your portfolio area across the whole, all portfolios. There's a tremendous number of things that have been able to be included in some efficiencies that have been found to help fund them too. Adam, I think you wanted to mention a couple of points.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Lavett summarised the no, not at all. No, it's a fantastic summary of some of the tangibles that residents will start to see in return for their council tax. And these are, I think, the green shoots of the unitary project starting to come forward. But it goes back to some of the complaints that we've heard about council tax rises. As Conservatives, we never relish a council tax rise or a tax rise of any kind, but we have to recognise that without raising the funds to do what we want to do, we will never be in a position to invest in services, and we will certainly never ever be in a position to contemplate increasing our staff's wages in line with the living wage. We have to take these difficult decisions at this point to give us the luxury of choices further down the line. And I think it's worth pointing out again that we have a council tax reduction scheme. We have a hardship fund. We'll continue to support the least well-off residents in every way that we can. But in order to provide the services that those least well-off people need, we need to ensure that we have a well-financed council. And actually, it will be the wealthiest residents sharing the highest portion of the burden. Those in Band H properties, those who don't benefit from a council tax reduction scheme. So I think it's a sensible and pragmatic approach. And we all wish that we had more money coming along from central government. There's no doubt about that. I think that would get support from across the chamber. I know that Councillor Nunn took the opportunity to lobby various people at party conference. The LGA continues to make representations to central government constantly in order to try and secure long-term and better funding for local government. Of course, those in Westminster have a myriad of priorities, and local government isn't always top of the list, but we'll continue pushing for that. But I hope that members of the public realise that the below inflation tax increase that we feel obliged to put forward in the budget is in many ways the only choice, and is in fact a sensible choice.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Adam. Excellent comments. Any further comments still from anybody? No, in which case, if I may, I'll thank all of our speakers there, but also draw Cabinet's attention to the recommendations of Section 3. Just ask you to confirm your agreement to the recommendations. Is that agreed? Fantastic. Thank you very much indeed. Next report is the draft housing revenue account budget. We have just one speaker, but first, Adam is going to take us through some of the key points and highlights of this report. Adam, over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. So similar to the other budget items that we've considered this evening, the purpose of the report is to present for consultation the draft housing revenue account budget for 22-23, including the forecast rent increases. So the forecast rent increase, as laid out in the government's national rent policy, and it's proposed to increase rents in line with the maximum allowed under the policy, which is the September 2021 CPI of 3.1% plus a real 1% increase. That equates to an average 4.1% increase. That translates into an average weekly increase per dwelling of £3.84, with average rents increasing from £93.66 to £97.50 per week. I would note at this stage that those who claim housing benefit under universal credit will see their benefit payments rise in line to cover this additional expense. Now, under the housing revenue account self-financing and ring fencing rules, to enable the council to deliver a new build programme, it's proposed to continue to prudentially increase HRA borrowing at this stage, the costs of which will be covered by revenue received from the rents of those new dwellings, to ensure that the capital financing costs remain affordable within the revenue account. The proposed maximum rent increase maximises the level of investment that can be afforded to deliver new council housing, and not only to deliver new council housing, but to ensure that we continue our programmes to insulate and to provide maximum energy efficiency at existing properties, and to carry out the necessary maintenance and enhancements of our existing portfolio. Also included in the draft budget is an average increase of 3.1% for tenants and leaseholders' service charges, with further work ongoing to look at future cost recovery of services provided. The capital budget and medium-term financial plan sets out significant continued investment of 70.4 million for 22-23, and a total of £257 million over the mid-term financial plan into the council's existing council houses and in new council housing provision, continuing to address the national shortage of affordable housing whilst moving toward a greener zero carbon housing stock. I point out at this stage, Chairman, that there were well over 3,000 people on the Northampton housing waiting list alone, which when you consider that that equates to around 1.5% of Northampton's population, is a fairly impressive figure. The mid-term financial plan investment of £167 million provides for the delivery of up to 1,000 new homes over the 5-year plan. The council continues with partners to be active in pursuit of external funding and has been successful in achieving both Homes England grants for specific new build schemes and decarbonisation grants from the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, which have enabled initial works to be brought forward to the earlier years of the mid-term financial plan. These future opportunities will help to shape the MTFP further over the next few years as the decarbonisation agenda develops. The report asks that Cabinet note the bid, which is included in the draft budget, that the Council has made in partnership with Northampton Partnership Homes for the first wave of the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund for £6.08 million, and approved delegated authority to the Executive Director of Finance to enter into a funding agreement with the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy if successful in the bid process. The report also sets out to approve for consultation the draft 22-23 management fee proposals, £99 million for the Council's Arm's Length Management Organisation, NPH, based on the draft budget presented. This fee is made up of revenue, both operational and managed budgets, and capital managed budgets for delivery of the HRA services as laid out in the Council's management agreement. Thank you, Chairman.
Terrific. Thank you, Adam. It's really helpful. So we have just one speaker, and that's Councillor Roberts. Emma.
Thank you, Chair. And just a brief declaration. I am a board member of Northampton Partnership Homes.
Of course. Thank you.
A couple of quick questions. Is there a prudent amount of reserves from the HRA? In the previous reports, it talks about the prudent levels of reserving, and I couldn't see anything. And apologies if I've missed it in there. At 4.3, we talk about housing strategy. Fab, great. March 22, looking really good. But I haven't seen any detail or information coming out. I know that Scrutiny have asked to be pre-decision scrutinising that strategy. But with the March 22 deadline, I think we just need to have a little bit more of an understanding of the layers of that. And then it's a genuine question, and I need to understand the building safety bill. As I understand it, puts the onus on an individual from the authority to take full responsibility for all implications arising out of that. Have we factored that into the budgeting, and do we know who that's going to be? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Roberts. So on the housing strategy, it's my understanding that Scrutiny will see a draft housing strategy in January. I'm determined that there's full engagement from Scrutiny as well as the wider Cabinet. So this is very far from an issue that I intend to consider in isolation. It's not one for a silo. This is effectively a strategy that will have huge impacts across West Northamptonshire. It's vital that we achieve a balance in terms of the very different needs of our rural areas, our market towns, and the big urban centre of Northampton. When it comes to the building safety bill and the requirement for a responsible person, it's something that we're aware of. We haven't made an appointment as yet. In terms of the budget implications, I'm not sure that there'll be significant budget implications of that requirement. And I'd refer to either Martin or Councillor Longley in terms of the question about reserving under the HRA.
Thanks, Martin. You were going to come in there.
Yes, thank you, Chair. If I can just refer you to paragraph 6.2.2 of the report, because I do form a view on what the minimum level of HRA balances should be, and I said it should be £5 million, and that's what we see flowing through the report.
Thank you, Martin. Missed that figure. I think there may be, hopefully Councillor Brown will indulge me, I was very quick in my question. I think there may be a budgetary consideration needed on the building safety bill. because of the level of protection we'll need. The individual will be fully responsible, both criminally and civilly, as I understand. So I think we might have a budget pressure to be considered there. And just you mentioned on the rent increases that it was only a small amount per week, and that those on housing benefit, etc., will receive the income for that. I think we just need to be mindful that over the 4-year period, if we see the same increase, people will be paying 115, 120 pounds for council accommodation, and given the people on the waiting list, I don't think that's appropriate. So I think we need to think about that for future.
Yeah, just in terms of the increase per week, I don't believe I did characterise it as small. I recognise that for for a lot of people who aren't eligible for universal credit, fall just outside that threshold. For some that will be significant. It's money that that they'll have to work hard to find within their household budget. However, when you balance that against the wider needs of the council, the need to invest in our social housing stock, the need to maintain the current properties that we have, so that our current tenants live in livable and the conditions that we would want them to reside in, then I think it's a prudent decision to take. Again, effectively an increase. It's almost a tax, and it's not a decision I relish, but I think it's the right decision.
People paying again, but I hear what you're saying. Thank you.
Someone has to pay.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Emma. Any further comments, questions at all from cabinet members on this one? No? Okay. In which case the recommendations are at section 2. So I'd ask you just to confirm your agreement to the recommendations. Agreed?
Agreed.
Fantastic. Thank you. So this takes us on to item 11. I'm just going to check at this point. All councillors would have seen the appendix 3, confidential information in that, which, were it to be released, would not be beneficial to the value for the taxpayer. Can we conduct item 11 without reference to appendix 3? Yeah. Sorry, Emma, did you want to comment on that?
I have a question. I won't mention any figures right now, but I have a question. I don't know if you want me to ask that question now, so you can then determine whether or not you need to discuss the figures.
Why not? My preference would be to keep the whole meeting in public. If we're able to get around that without having to stop the streaming and so on, then that'd be useful. What's the nature of the question?
So the question is around the breakdown that's now exempt, was previously considered not exempt.
Oh.
And was actually published almost in its entirety, although the final number is slightly different. So given that we published it previously, I don't understand why it's not being published now.
Where did
when the previous cabinet papers were
was it
considered.
included in previous cabinet papers?
Yeah.
Anybody want to just quickly comment?
It's a very, very similar breakdown that was published.
Anybody just want to comment on that, or?
Kath, I would think.
I think it's going your way, Kath, that one.
I don't know. I'm sorry. I don't know the answer to that question. I mean, obviously, when we look at papers, I ask people why it is that they feel that the paper needs to be confidential, and we do push back quite regularly in terms of particular papers as to whether or not we think it is. If it's been published and I haven't been aware of it, then obviously I don't know to push back. So I'm sorry about that. If that's the case, then certainly we can look at that and review it after the meeting. And if it is the case, then we will publish it as you suggested. But it's a difficult one because I'm always, needing to weigh those things up without necessarily having all the information. But it's something I do challenge and push back on.
Nevertheless,
I don't know if I can help.
oh,
Chair.
sorry, Phil.
But the report does mention a sum in relation to land. And obviously we're still in negotiation and we don't want to release that figure. So it becomes known for those who we might be purchasing land from.
I think that's the key.
That's why it's exempt.
I think that's the key point of it. Nevertheless, if speakers are happy to, without reference to those numbers, of which you're one, Emma, if we're able to proceed, I'm going to suggest that we do that without going into private session and therefore without ending the streaming. Is that agreed by all?
I'm happy for you to proceed without for the sake of this evening, but I think it does need to be reviewed because I understand what Councillor Larrett is saying, but as far as I can see, it's only the totals that are different. So I think it needs to be reviewed and published if it was previously published.
Yeah, okay. Assuring that we'll do that. Let's move on with the item. And as you rightly point out, I think Phil's going to start with an introduction to it. And then we have in fact 5 speakers, the order of which is Councillor Roberts, Councillor Randall, Councillor Purser, Councillor Harris, and then Councillor Pritchard. Phil, over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. The purpose of this report is to secure agreement on the final aspects related to the Northwest Relief Road required to enable this project to proceed to construction. As members will recall, a report in June identified the possibility of a £20 million budget shortfall being funded by the government's Levelling Up Fund. We did submit a bid, but this was not successful, I'm afraid. In fact, no road schemes were funded through that round of Levelling Up Fund bids. This paper requests that Cabinet approves borrowing against the £20 million funding shortfall in order that the scheme can proceed to site early in 2022. This, and I'm sure you're aware, Chair, because you and I have debated this with officers of a previous authority on many occasions. This is a legacy project that has been discussed many times in terms of the need and its merits, details of which is included in the report and has been previously agreed. Planning consent was approved in September 2020 and design work has been completed by the design and build contractor, Balfour Beatty, and a revised contractual target cost for a start on site in early 22 has been agreed. Land acquisition discussions are ongoing with draft heads of terms agreed with all landowners. This includes legal agreements which will be invoked when funding has been confirmed by Cabinet. Scheme estimates have not changed since June 2021 when it was reported to Cabinet, which sought a total funding commitment of 54.533 million with committed funding contributions of 32.583 million. The report details the funding package, which already identifies 4.2 million agreed from the previous NBC and 1.95 million from West Northants as agreed in June. The rest of the funding is made up from SEMLEP contribution and developer contributions. Prior to agreeing to support this report, I have ensured that other options were considered and they are identified in this report below, as well as an assurance that this road does not prejudice the reopening of the Northampton to Market Harbour rail line. Discussions have been held in recent weeks with representatives of the Department for Transport rail team who have agreed to some extent with the assessment enabling this road to proceed. I do believe that they are still waiting for some information, but we will resolve that in the coming few weeks. And if we can't resolve that, I'm afraid I'll have to bring it back, but we do want to retain the support of the Department for Transport. They see this as a strategic rail route and we need to work in partnership with them and we will do everything we can to do so. So on that basis, I therefore refer members to the recommendations outlined in paragraph 3 of the report and ask for your support for them. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you very much indeed. I mean, you're right with the challenges that have faced this road, not made easier by the dramatic change in cost from the initial estimate costings, which were proven to be way, way out, weren't they? Since then, it's been the business of filling that gap. One of our main motivators of filling that gap is the delivery of 2,000 houses, without which we would be in trouble on housing delivery, and that would affect a whole bunch of different things, not least the control over our own planning system. So to actually finally get a result on this would be tremendously positive for the whole area, but it has been quite a painful journey. Let's move to our speakers, first of which is Councillor Roberts. Emma, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report. I've got a number of questions about the Levelling Up Fund itself. I can't see anything in the report that says whether we made it past the gateway stage or not. My understanding is that only 10 bids out of 305 didn't make it past that first stage. So I'd be interested to understand if we're one of those. And have we had any feedback yet? Because my understanding is the government would provide feedback on those who were unsuccessful so that resubmissions could be made in spring next year. So have we considered a resubmission and the timeframes that allows? Councillor said that no transport projects were progressed through, but I thought I'd read that they were, and I'm pretty sure that any transport project that scored 75 out of 100 was automatically approved. And on the government website, there is a number of projects for road improvement schemes, so I would have put those as transport projects. We've known about this since August, that we didn't get the fund. So why are we now asking to do this urgently without council approval? Because we've known about it since August, and it should be going to full council. I think I'm not going to debate whether the road is needed or the road isn't. People were consulted on it and that's their position. But I think what it appears to me is that we've bid for something. We shouted about the fact that we were going to get it and it was going to be brilliant. We haven't got it. We've not shouted about that a lot. And now we're going to put the £20 million plus interest bill onto residents. And that's not, for me, not appropriate. So are we reviewing our funding programs and how we bid for things, and to make sure that we are successful, and whether we work collaboratively? Do we know why we weren't successful? It's the key point.
Phil, or maybe Stuart, do you both want to chip in there possibly?
I'll ask Stuart to reply to some aspects of that, because I'm not 100% up to speed whether we've had any feedback as yet, but I'll speak on that. But as far as it goes, we made the bid for this funding in conjunction with local MP, who's gave their full support, and we did everything we should have done to secure the bid. My understanding is that there was no new road schemes. I didn't say transport schemes, road schemes. No new road schemes. There may have been one that was already in the pipeline that got some funding made available, but there was no successful new road schemes from the Levelling Up Fund. Yes, the government have announced some new road schemes, but not from the Levelling Up Fund, as I understand it. They were announced in part of the budget process of the government. So that's where we are with that. Stuart, can you respond to the other points on that, where we are with feedback, etc.?
Yes, sure. Thank you. And in relation to the gateway and feedback, we worked with government in terms of the pre-submission on that, and we certainly did pass all of the gateways in terms of the benefits cost ratios that this scheme provided, etc. So it was seen as a well-performing submission. We have been offered feedback and we've wanted and requested that feedback. As yet, again, there was a significant number of projects submitted, as you've identified. We've not got dates yet for that feedback, but we have indeed requested that. In terms of resubmission, I think in terms of Levelling Up, it will change, is the expectation. That we haven't received the guidance. We're expecting a white paper to come out in January that will identify the future of Levelling Up and what that means. Certainly discussions with the civil servants are identifying that it will be very much looking at service delivery and community type facilities, if that makes sense. So until we've got the white paper, until we've got the guidelines in regard to this particular scheme, we won't be obviously looking to develop anything and put it forward. So it's very much understanding what's out there in terms of grants, what's out there in terms of funding and trying to plan for that as we move forward. As you said in the budget, there is monies there to help and assist with pipeline projects, to develop a range of projects that are oven ready for when the grants and the funding becomes available to move that forward. So we are continuously reviewing the strategy for applying for money. We were hopeful, and I think I expressed that hope at the June Cabinet. It did meet all the gateways, and unfortunately, it was not successful.
Sorry, did we go past stage one, Stuart?
That's my understanding, is it was fully reviewed at the scoring committee in regard to that. But again, Councillor Roberts, I think we'll get more information at the feedback session, which I'm more than happy through Councillor Larratt. I'm sure we'll be happy to share that as we go forward. There is a timescale issue in regard to making this decision. The SEMLEP monies is of 7.95 million needs to be, and the grant conditions is it needs to be spent in spring next year. So this decision today allows us to capture that 7.95 million and make sure that it's part of the scheme. If we didn't do this decision now, we would then have to find further funding to make it happen. So there is funding requirements that mean we need to make a decision today, and that's why it's before members. I think I've answered your questions.
You have answered all the questions, apart from we knew about it in August and we're bringing it to this meeting, and it was added as an extra item on the agenda about a week ago. The point is, it could have gone to full council. Councillor Larratt talked about the unsuccessful bid in the 2nd of December. It only got one line, but talked about the unsuccessful bid then. So it could have been brought as an urgent matter to that meeting, and then we wouldn't have needed to have followed urgency procedures for such an extensive amount of borrowing.
Okay. Our next speaker then is Councillor Randall. Wendy, over to you.
Right, thank you. Obviously, you did say that it come before council in June, but for a lot of new councillors, I suppose we were walking into this quite blind. I definitely was. When I saw Levelling Up Fund refused, alarm bells rang with me, because I just instantly thought, was this not good enough to invest in? So I was really uncomfortable with it. We had the floor bypass built in 2018, 3.5 miles, supposedly to improve travel between Daventry and the M1. On a good day, it might be a minute quicker, and on a bad day, it can be hours longer. Being as it's a single carriageway, the same as this one's planned. 3 months after the floor bypass opened, very sadly, it claimed its first victim. 2 lorries collided. It was a nice straight piece of road. They obviously got on that road thinking probably that it was a dual carriageway. 3 months later, there was another serious accident involving a lorry and 3 vehicles. 3 people very seriously injured were taken to hospital. And from then on, there has just been numerous accidents along that road. Numerous times that road has been closed. So just err with caution when you're doing a new road and it's single carriageway, you know, be mindful. Thank you. And I'm going to dash because I'm off on a night shift.
Thank you, Wendy.
While the road is single carriageway, it will be available for widening to dual carriageway if the Northern Orbital follows this route, which I hope it won't. I hope it will remain single carriageway with the Northern Orbital going further out as the original plans indicated, but we'll have to wait and see. But this is being built on the basis that it can be dual in the in the future.
Thanks, Phil. Next speaker is Councillor Purser. Bob?
Thank you, Chair. I have some sympathies with Councillor Larratt in this situation, but the end result will be that it's local council taxpayers who will end up paying for this road, when really it should be the government, because the government wants us to have increased housing development in this area. And if they want us to have increased housing, they must put in the infrastructure and pay for it. And I think it is therefore incumbent on you, with your political colleagues, to persuade them of that through our MPs and directly to government. If government wants us to have the sort of housing growth we're expected to produce in this area, they must provide and pay for the infrastructure. And it's your job to persuade your colleagues that that's what should be done. That's my point.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. I'm not
Can
the
I,
expert.
can I thank the councillor for his comments? And I remember standing in Northampton Guildhall alongside the then Deputy Prime Minister, John Prescott, and we were talking about infrastructure first. And perhaps Rebecca remembers it, I don't know. But we had a long debate, but it's never come. It never came from that government. It never came from this government. But infrastructure first is the absolute way it should be. But unfortunately, it doesn't seem to be happening. So thank you for your sympathy. But I think we're all in this boat together.
Thank you. Thank you, Bob. Two more speakers. The next is Councillor Harris. Jonathan.
Thank you, Chair. Just with your permission, if I could refer back to the earlier point about Appendix B4. I have read Appendix B4, still doesn't really give the detail I'm looking for, so I'll pick that point up separately, if I may. On this particular issue, my concerns about this is 7.6 of the report says, to quote, limited effects on the climate. I'm sure this must be somewhat disingenuous. I've asked before on other road build projects, there is always an embodied carbon cost for any new road, any new structure. And we must think about how this will be mitigated. If this council is truly going to live up to its climate declaration, we must have a standard practice of calculating the cost in carbon terms. And this should be contained within the to emissions in a range of ways. I've mentioned embodied carbon, the actual infrastructure itself, the materials used to build the road, land clearance, tree felling and loss of carbon sinks, higher speeds and induced traffic, meaning increased road capacity, which usually follows once you build a road. And obviously these are linked to car-dependent housing estates often, and retail parks and business parks. There is an excellent report, which I'm very happy to share with Councillor Larratt and Stewart on a group called Transport for Quality of Life. But it seems to me that it's a calculation that is omitted continually in reports of this nature. It's not just here, it's across the country. But I think it's about time that we acknowledge that we cannot simply say it's limited impact on the climate. That is patently not correct. And we need to make sure that we're accounting for it and actually doing the appropriate thing. I'm not suggesting that the road shouldn't be built. That's not my argument. My argument is if we're going to be net zero or carbon neutral, it has to be mitigated for. Thank you.
I think that's a fair point, and it's a massive job we have to do that across the whole of West Northants, actually, isn't it? But yeah, without a doubt, we should. That's a fair point, Jonathan.
Can I agree with the councillor on that, and I hope that we will be looking at construction methods. I'm very mindful of the work that HS2, with all respect, are putting in to their construction methods to ensure that what they do is as carbon neutral or carbon efficient as possible. And I hope that the concrete that's used, the method of working that will be used to develop this road will follow that example of HS2 and minimise the impact of the development itself. But I hear what the member says on the issue.
Thank you. One last speaker on this one, it's Councillor Pritchard. Ken, welcome.
Thank you, Chair. It's feeling from my perspective after the Lord Mayor's show, because I'm the only councillor that's not on the opposition bench. So hopefully that some of my colleagues actually will be here in future. I can appreciate that the NCC legacy project of this particular road. And I think we've covered everything with regards to why it should be there and so on and so forth. But there's a couple of questions I wanted to ask with regards to some of the funding. When you consider that the £20 million loan that we're actually applying for at this, reading through some of the papers, is a 10% contingency enough? Looking at some of these major projects, and we can think of HS2 and all these sort of things, they actually go totally and utterly out of kilter with regards to what the original budget was. So if we could actually have a look at and just ensure that we don't have any major surprises as the project goes on. Also, is the contract that we're actually going to go with Balfour Beatty, is it a fixed price contract? Because once again, major developers always have a little knack of actually saying, oh no, that's not included. And or also you've changed the contractual requirements, so therefore we can put the price up. And once again, this is, does cause significant increase in the overall costs. I think also, even though this particular budget was actually formulated 6-7 months ago, I think you'll all agree is that things like building materials have gone up enormous. They really have. And with the experience of some of my colleagues that are actually having a self-build house, some of the projects, some of the actual components have gone up 70, even 100%. So if we could actually just consider that sort of thing. Also, with regards to the funding, and when we look at some of the reading through some of the papers there, some of the, if I can call it drip funding that's coming from 106 and SIL monies, what happens if in fact some of the houses that are not built as we anticipate, what's going to happen with regards to some of the additional funding that's required for this particular project? Will we be taking out another loan to increase that sort of deficit in some of the fundings? When you also look at the overall cost of the loan will be £23.2 million, and that's obviously over 20 years. Will the loan agreement that we put in place, will it be a fixed rate agreement? Sorry about all those questions regards from a financial aspect, but I think you can see that we have to look at it very closely indeed, just to ensure that some of our original budgets are actually met.
Yeah, thank you, Ken. I think they're all very valid questions. Phil?
Very valid indeed, Chair, and I'll ask Stuart and perhaps
nicely played, Phil.
To answer those technical aspects of it. But my understanding is that the SIL money is already there, so I don't think we're relying on future SIL income. I believe it's already there. Contingency worries me. You're building over the floodplain, you're building a viaduct over the floodplain. Who knows what you're going to find when you get down there into the depths and the piling. The piling has also got to be constructed to a specification that will enable the road to be lifted in future years, if necessary, to cross over the rail line that goes underneath. So we've got to make sure that that specification, that bridge can be ramped and go over the railway line, and that it may cause problems. I do worry about that, but I'm assured by officers that the contingency is there, that there will be no surprises. I do keep asking. And I'm also told, and I totally agree with you, Ken, I think there's an issue over prices where the figures come from a revised costings done in June. times have changed significantly since then. You know, we've had COVID, the return to work, the lack of HGV drivers, etc. I mean, Stuart's got a part of his car stuck in Belgium, you know, and can't get it repaired. You know, you know, and it all adds to cost. And I'm very concerned about that, although we have been assured that the costs are still accurate. But on the technical aspects, I'll leave it to Martin and Stuart to respond to those.
Thank you. Thanks, Phil. That's helpful. Stuart, do you want to chip in on any of these points?
Yeah, and thanks for the questions. I think a significant amount of this is about risk transfer. And as you suggested, Councillor, a lot of this goes down to the contract we've signed with Balfour Beatties or about to sign, subject to this funding. And the subject to, I'll come back to in a second. It is a fixed price design and build contract. We have transferred all of the risk in terms of the construction of the road to Balfour Beatties. We do hold some of the risk, and that risk is minimal. And as a council, we own around about £1.5 million of the overall budget in terms of risk. So the contingency from our perspective, we think is a reasonable one. As a council, we do have £1.1 million of contingency as part of this overall budget. So because of the risk transfer, because of the fact we've just about to sign the contract, which they've agreed to hold that price, it does therefore take into account all of the building increases, the inflation costs that we've just talked about, etc. So they're comfortable, challenged, but comfortable to hold that price till this meeting, and a decision is made to then sign that. So again, I think we've looked at all of the mitigations and all of the issues you've raised. We've factored all of those in, and we're confident that, again, as far as you can be with civil engineering, that we've done all we can to ensure that we deliver this to price, to budget, to time, as we go forward. I think that answers your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you want to comment, Martin, at all on the rate changes and so on?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to pick up on one point in relation to how we fund the scheme. So within the report, you got the worst case scenario of borrowing of up to £20 million. But obviously, in the meantime, if we generate additional capital receipts, we wouldn't need to borrow as much. So we present the borrowing position as the worst case position here. In response to your question about where we would get that funding from, it would be from the PWLB, and we'd seek to fix that borrowing rate so it wouldn't vary over time. So we've got that certainty going forward.
So the rate won't be fixed, it'd be variable, presumably, on the loan.
We would fix it through the PWLB. We'd look to fix it. So it doesn't, because if you've got a variable rate risk, then if you've got a variable rate, you've got the risk that over time that can increase.
Yeah.
Whereas we'd like to lock down that risk in a fixed rate, particularly because the rate's pretty low at the moment, because that gives us certainty going forward.
Thank you. Just another couple of comments. It just occurs to me, one thing Ken said is what happens if houses aren't built. I think that's unlikely because of demand, but of course the speed at which they're built is down to the developer, isn't it, I guess? And they may choose to do that slowly so as not to flood the market. Do we have any influence over any mitigation over that at all? Is that something to consider? Or?
It's one of the factors we continue to look at and monitor. So as members will know, there is part of this road is actually built by the developers, and therefore this is a continuation of that particular road. The housing is being delivered at probably a greater rate than we thought at this particular time, and there's no slowdown on the housing market at this time as we go forward. Again, it's something we continue to monitor. As Councillor Larrard has said, a significant part of the funding is already in the bank. There is still more to come, as you've identified. So it's a case with all of these is that we continue to look at that, monitor it, and then we'll mitigate as we go forward as may be necessary. But at this time, it's looking like a solid position, and therefore we can recommend the report as we've done to Cabinet today.
Thanks, Stuart.
Thank
Lizzie, you were going to make a comment. Was it in relation to one of Ken's points? Or
It was, but I think it's all been said actually. So I'm not going to
You
say any
happy?
more, but good questions.
Brilliant.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you very much. Does anybody else have any other comments or queries that they would like to raise? Any cabinet members on this one? No, in which case the recommendations are at section 3. Can I just ask you to confirm your agreement to those recommendations, please? Is that agreed? That's great. Thank you very much. Well, that was our last item this evening. Can I thank everybody? Our speakers have come along and asked some excellent questions, made some excellent points, our officers and everybody. As this is our last meeting before Christmas, may I also take the opportunity of wishing you a very merry, happy, healthy, safe Christmas and a